Okay, this week what we're going to do is we're going to talk about later adolescence, and what we're going to focus on this evening is not only the crises of that particular stage, the tasks as well, but we're also going to touch on Tiedeman and his career decision phase model, as well as the argument between Kohlberg and Gilligan with regards to what moral development really is. So the having her tasks for the later adolescent stage focuses a lot around identity, independence, physical development, social development, moral and ethical development, things like that. And you see a lot of effort going into kind of identifying who they are as individuals, independent of their family, and kind of setting themselves apart emotionally and as well as economically, finding their first jobs, kind of identifying what their strengths are, and getting ready to go out and be a productive member of society, possibly getting married and sustaining a career. So it all kind of breaks down into these four areas: autonomy from parents. Again, they gain independence, uh, greater independence. You kind of see a bit of a struggle for that at times. Gender identity, they've kind of navigated or are in the middle of navigating their identity as who they are as sexual beings, not necessarily who they are as a being who has sex, but a being who is physically male or female, and also what that means for them in society. And then, or internalized morality, they kind of come to an understanding of what they believe in, their ideals, their ideology, things of that nature. And also, you see career choice begin to kind of uh, become a focus for this age group. So let's talk a little bit about identity and role confusion. Um, at this age, they're really adolescents are really seeking a sense of who they are. Now, if you recall last time, we talked about adolescents trying to figure out who they are in relation to a larger group. So they try to find a group in which they identify. And now they're kind of trying to consolidate their experiences from earlier stages into a sense of I am this person. It is individual identity versus individual role confusion, as opposed to group identity versus group role confusion, like we talked about last time. So we're going to touch on a couple things with regards to this topic. We're going to hit Erickson's theory, of course, but we're also going to bring in Marcia's work, as well as talk about some research that's been done in terms of identity and attachment with parental figures and how the parents, basically. So Erickson had this to say about this particular stage. He said, the integration now taking place in the form of ego identity is more than the sum of childhood identifications. So we can kind of understand this in terms of identity being a gestalt, something that is greater than the sum of its parts. It is the accrued experience of the ego's ability to integrate these identifications with the vicissitudes of the libido, with the aptitudes developed out of endowment, and with the opportunities offered in social roles. And here you can see kind of Erickson touching on three main aspects. You see him touching on the vicissitudes of the libido. So he's talking about the drive to create, the impetus to perform and make things, to generate new things. The aptitudes developed out of endowment, obviously the biological aptitudes. What are the things that we are born into, the strengths that we have innately, and the opportunities offered in social roles, being bringing in the parental influence, the group peers influence, important identity figure influences, and the like. So aspects of identity formation include three things. Sort of sense of autonomy, a sense of self as a continuous being. I am the same today and tomorrow. Now, we all know that a person develops over time and changes over time, but there's a sense of, okay, I am who I think I am, and I'm not going to make any radical changes in the near future. Now, when the child is in early adolescence or even later childhood, that sense of continuity, it's kind of shaky because they're going through such rapid changes. But now that they're in later adolescence, things begin to kind of slow down and they become kind of more stable in their development. Occupation, affiliation. They are, and we'll talk about this more when we talk about Tiedeman and his occupational role theory. But they become affiliated and identify with their particular career or their job that they have. They gain friends, they learn the system, and they kind of internalize those sorts of experiences that they have into a sense of who they are. And then ideology, the cognitive piece, in which the adolescent takes in the values and the morals of the society around them, the groups that they're in, the work that they do, and they say, okay, I am this person, and I'm going to be this person within this environment. It's the ideals and the messages that they have internalized and will carry forth into their various roles. So, in terms of Erikson's 6 aspects plus Gleason's theological aspect, the central process of this stage is role experimentation. They are looking to figure out who they are going to be. They're trying to go out and test the waters in relationships and work. They're seeing what they like, what they don't like. It's a time of experimentation, exploration, and they're seeing where their ideals and their values fit in society, and subsequently where they fit in society. The radius of significant relations, much like the previous stage that was created after Erikson came up with this, is peers, obviously. These are the people that they surround themselves with, that they identify with, and it's not necessarily group peers anymore. It could just be a clique of friends or a club that you are involved with, or something like that. Not necessarily group identity as much as it is who I am in relation to my peers, that sort of thing. The adaptive ego quality is fidelity, or a sense of faithfulness to what has been conveyed to you, the meanings and messages that have been conveyed to the adolescent in their life. And so the ego quality is a faithfulness or a fidelity to those messages. It's a carrying on of those messages and an application of those messages that they have received throughout their entire life to where they are at currently. And that's the standards by which they identify themselves. I am, I'm going to be this kind of person because this kind of person is the kind of person that I want to be. I am going to, make a lot of money, or I'm going to help a lot of people, or I'm going, because it's the right thing to do. And I've had a lot of models and peers and mentors who have modeled that for me, and it's become a part of myself. The core pathology of this, though, is just the opposite: repudiation or a rejection of these messages. Now, certainly, repudiation isn't necessarily a negative thing, because this allows for change. Sometimes we can be so faithful to the messages that we receive that we bog down in them and we can't move forward from them without significant work. Whereas if we examine them critically and find things that aren't necessarily applicable to us in our experience, we may repudiate those messages and move forward as a change agent in our own life. But if we reject whole out in a dogmatic fashion the messages that we've received from our parents, from our peers, from society at large, we become a self-imposed pariah. We ostracize ourselves from the messages we've received, and we are kind of identity-less. Erikson has this to say about repudiation. Young people can become remarkably clannish, intolerant, and cruel in their exclusion of others who are different in skin color or cultural background, in tastes and gifts, and often in entirely petty assets of dress and gesture, arbitrarily selected as the signs of in-grouper or out-group. It is important to understand in principle that such intolerance may be, for a while, a necessary defense against a sense of identity loss. So Erikson is pointing out to the fact that that repudiation of certain aspects, certain people, certain values can be beneficial to the individual in that they have a sense of who they are, perhaps, and because they have that sense of who they are, they're able to say, no, I don't believe that, or no, you are not going to influence me in that way because, I don't see it that way. And so what you get here is the principle of social order. It is the ideological view that the person approaches the world. Who am I? That's the big question of this age. Who am I? And what do I believe? Who am I in relation to others? Who am I in relation to myself? What values do I ascribe to? What values do I repudiate? And this can lead to the ritualization ritualism. The person can be ideological. They can say, I believe this, and I adhere to this, and it forms a system of belief around me that I use to approach the world. But the ritualism of this becomes a dogmatism. It is a total rejection, total repudiation of the messages that they've received, such that they are, again, identityless. They are drifting through life. Their identity is, what we will discuss later, diffuse. Erikson has this to say about ideological ritualizations and the ideological principle of social order. For it is through their ideology that social systems enter into the fiber of the next generation and attempt to absorb into their life blood the rejuvenative power of youth. Adolescence is thus a vital regenerator in the process of social evolution, for youth can offer its loyalties and energies, its fidelity, both to the conservation of that which continues to feel true and to the revolutionary correction of that which has lost its rejuvenative significance. Now, what does that mean? What Erikson is saying here is, this is the age at which an adolescent will decide what they are taking into the future of society, what messages they have received in the past from whom, from their social circles, and what they will maintain or cast aside. And based upon that, they will one day change society. They will pass those messages that they have kept on to future generations, whereas the messages that they have repudiated and rejected will not be passed on. Social evolution is what you refer to. So the theological lesson that John Gleason refers to in this stage is the nature of humanness. Adolescents at this stage and the stage before it are extremely aware of who they are. They are very self-introspective, self-reflective, questioning who they are, looking to kind of figure out themselves as humans, as men and women of the future, and who they are in relation to God. Well, what values have they been presented? What are their ideological views that they have approached an understanding of God with? Is God a good and loving entity? Or is God something to be feared or hated because of some negative experience that they've had or some negative message that they've been uh, told repeatedly? So let's talk a little bit about Marcia. Marcia came up with the concept of identity development, the four aspects of identity development. And these aspects involve either a crisis or no crisis, or a commitment or no commitment. And you can kind of, as you see here, put this on a four quadrant chart, in which an individual who has gone through an identity crisis, but has found commitment, has achieved identity, has achieved who they believe they are to be, or has chosen who they are going to be. Whereas somebody who has high levels of commitment, but has not had a crisis of trying to figure out who they are, they foreclose. And this is seen by people who have had their identities chosen for them by their parents. Kids whose parents have said, you're going to be a doctor when you grow up. You're going to be a lawyer when you grow up. You're going to be a ditch digger when you grow up. Something like that. And the child just grows up with these messages in their head and just assumes, okay, this is going to be who I am going to be. Somebody who is in perpetual crisis, though, is in a moratorium. They're not committed, but they're still in crisis. And you can see somebody being in a perpetual crisis, never really figuring out who they are. They're still exploring. They're still uncertain. It's a positive stage. You may look at the term moratorium and think to yourself, oh, it's a negative thing. No, not necessarily. A moratorium could be an adolescent trying to figure out who they are. They are in a level of moratorium in that they are still exploring their options. So moratorium just means exploration and uncertainty. Whereas diffusion, that's where things kind of go from moratorium, sort of the positive aspect of a moratorium, to more of a negative aspect. These people are confused. They don't know what they're going to do with life. They're drifters. They're the ones who are moochers and just never really kind of figure out, a direction. And because of that, they're kind of lost. And just standing here, I'm thinking of several people I know who have this sort of experience. They don't have a push towards any one goal or any one sense of this is who I want to be. They have no crisis other than perhaps I have no idea what I want to do. But at the same time, they're not really seeking. They're not really wanting to figure out who they are. They're not committed to any one ideal or identity. They could be any number of things, but they'll never commit. Fortunately, though, we see a lot more achievement as one ages than we do diffusion or foreclosure. Now, the thing is, and we'll talk about this in just a little bit, is that parenting styles can greatly impact this. So diffusion, as you can see, at early childhood, late childhood, early adolescence, it's very high. That's to be expected. But within that maybe decade of time between 12 and 24, you see diffusion of identity decrease precipitously, whereas achievement rises substantially. So it's a positive thing. Most people kind of figure themselves out. So I mentioned parenting styles can have a play on this, and certain authors, actually Marcia, um, identified parenting styles that facilitate achievement or foreclosure or diffusion. Now, notice here that there is no moratorium here. Why is that? Because everybody goes through it. And no one parenting style causes somebody to bog down in a moratorium. The person's seeking something. Everybody goes through a period where they're kind of like, okay, I have no idea what I want to do with my life. Let's think about this. That's regardless of parenting styles, aside from maybe authoritarian, in which the individual goes immediately to foreclosure. Anyway, so the authoritative parent obviously is the more positive parenting style, and it oftentimes leads to a level of achievement. Authoritarian, like I just mentioned, tends to lead to foreclosure, and indulgent parents with their kind of passive messages about, oh, you can do whatever you want to do, and we'll still love you, and oh, well, I'm not really going to help you figure out what you want to do, but I'll encourage you to do whatever it is that you do want to do. Well, those people tend to become very diffuse in their identity and have a difficult time kind of committing to one thing. Very little guidance. So let's talk about the relationship of dependence and independence. So how does one person become dependent or independent on another person? And where in this does interdependence lie? Well, there are two theories of this. One says that interdependence is a natural stage from dependence to independence to interdependence. It's a sort of a maturational model in which, for instance, when we're young children, toddlers, infants, we're very dependent upon our family members. When we're adolescents or young adults, we kind of become independent and we push away and we say, no, I can do this on my own. I don't need anybody. Whereas interdependence then comes later when we say, okay, I need to partner with somebody. I can't live this life on my own. I have to kind of have a sense of grounding in my life, and I need to rely on somebody to be my partner. Another theory of this, though, excuse me, is that independence-dependence relationship exists along a continuum in which dependence is at one end, independence is at another, and interdependence exists somewhere in the middle. And identity formation kind of is a melding of these two aspects. So finding an interdependent relationship, finding who we are as interdependent and communal creatures that have been created by God, obviously, exists along a continuum of balancing between dependence and independence. So we talked about, I alluded to the fact that we were going to talk about Tiedeman's model of career decision-making, and here it is. So Tiedeman came up with the idea that there are 7 aspects of career decision-making. Now, the first, I believe the first 4 are aspects of jumping into a career, kind of finding out your career path. The last 3, though, kind of focus on where I am in my career and, how I feel and think about it. Okay, so the first one is exploration, in which, we kind of look at our strengths and weaknesses. We say, what are our options? Am I good at math? Am I good at reading or writing? Do I listen well? Something like that. Am I strong? Am I athletic? Something of that nature. And what are my options based upon those strengths? Crystallization occurs whenever we kind of figured out our strengths and weaknesses, and we say, okay, let's bring in the information together and say, all right, where are the certain areas that I could go? Okay, it's a a drawing together or a consolidation of everything that they've kind of gone through to this point. Then they make a choice. All right, they make a strengths weakness chart. They tick down the list and say, okay, well, the last thing that's on the list is this, and I'm going to go to law school, or I'm going to go be a doctor, or I'm going to go into construction or sports. All right, here we go. And then the clarification stage is where they kind of work out the details. Are they going, which school are they going to choose? Where are they going to go to school? Where are they going to apply for a job? Or what do they feel like they are good at in the subspecialties of these jobs, or something like that? Now, once they're in the job, there's a stage of induction, or gaining proficiency. They feel good about getting the job. They're relieved that they can kind of have this job, and they're excited for it. They're happy to have it. They're energized and jazzed to go to work. And they gain proficiency at it. They gain practice first couple weeks, months, maybe years, and they just are happy to be, having a job. The influence stage comes when they gain congruence with coworkers. And this is kind of a in-group, out-group sort of thing. So if, for instance, you ever worked at a grocery store, I did for about 7 years, you have stock clerks, you have cashiers, you have the deli workers, the bakery workers, and each of those sections kind of is its own little clique. And they have their own language, their own behaviors, their own, styles of interaction that draw the employee in, draw the individual in, and give them a sense of, I am X, I am Y, I am Z. And, this is how I identify myself with this group. And this leads further into the integration stage, where the person's identity and purpose meld with their job. They see themselves as, this is what I do, therefore this is what I am. The novelty of the job wears off at this point. It's not, they're not exactly excited or thrilled to go into work. They're proficient at it. They've got a sense of, I know who I am, and I know what it's like to work with these guys. So, I'm just going to go to work. It becomes routine. It's not necessarily bad that it loses its novelty or that they are less excited to be there, but it's just not quite as, they don't have the pep in their step, as it were, to go to work. And they gain perspective on their choice. They say, you know what, if I hadn't gone here, I could have been this, or I could have done this. But as it is, I closed those doors whenever I decided to go work at the grocery store, or go to law school, or, something like that. So let's talk a little bit about moral development. Kohlberg versus Gilligan. So Kohlberg came up with his theory of moral development when he gave consideration to the fact that some of the best things, well, we'll say best things because this is where we're at now, but in hindsight, looking at, for instance, the founding of Israel or the founding of the United States, these sorts of major things that occur in history, some people could consider them to be illegal acts. Some people could see them as rebellion or revolution. And is it moral for us to rebel or to perform illegal acts if it gets a certain positive end, but at the same time is a negative thing? So to test this, Kohlberg came up with the Heinz story. And this is a pretty famous story in psychology. I'm not going to read all of this, but basically it's just saying, so, if you had the option of saving somebody and you had to break the law to do so, will you do it? And so based upon this story and how people reacted to it at different age groups, Kohlberg came up with his 6 stages of moral development, which we've talked about before. And here they are once again. Uh, and you've actually, probably studied these quite thoroughly, so I'm not going to go over them again. But just so you kind of have a little bit more information, the level one stage, again, deals with rewards and punishments. Level two, or the conventional stage, this is pre-conventional, conventional, post-conventional. This model, this level works off of what people have seen, rules, societal rules, and things of that nature. And then the third level deals with the dialogue, internal dialogue, and interpersonal interactions with other people, and the values the person places upon those. And you can read these at your own leisure. But basically, these are examples of what somebody would say either for or against Hines' actions, depending on what their stage of moral development is. So the thing about Kohlberg's theory is that it doesn't focus on content, but it focuses on how the person reasons. It's not necessarily saying, okay, it's not focusing on whether or not the person says Hines is right or wrong. It's focusing on how they come to that conclusion that determines what stage they are in. The understanding of higher stages is limited in that somebody who's at like stage 3 isn't going to be able to understand somebody at stage 5 or 6. Generally, you can kind of understand somebody's reasoning if they're maybe from a stage 3 to a stage 4, or 2 to a 3, or 1 to a 2. But jumping beyond that, from to a 3 to a 5, or a 6, or a 4 to a 6, it's difficult for somebody at those stages to understand that higher level of reasoning. Development typically occurs whenever somebody encounters a contradiction, or kind of has their way of thinking challenged to the point where they have to think about, that's kind of a different perspective. I haven't thought about that before. Let me give it some thought. Stages are sequential, and according to Kohlberg, they are invariant. But according to Kohlberg, there are different rates of attainment of each stage. So somebody could be at, stage 2 and be at stage 2 for 4 or 5 years, whereas somebody else could be at stage 2 and be in there for maybe only 1 or 2 years. Who knows? But somebody's not going to go from stage 1 to 4 or stage 2 to 6 in just one jump. It is sequential and invariant in that sequence, according to Kohlberg. No one is a pure any stage. Nobody's a pure 3 or a pure 2. Somebody is always going to have sort of situations in which they utilize, maybe more primitive moral reasoning. For instance, I don't speed down a particular road around here because I know the police work it pretty hard, and I don't want to get a ticket. So that's what? Avoidance of punishment. That's like level 1, But I can also reason at higher levels as well. Stages are assumed to be universal. Everybody's assumed to have these. So from Western cultures to, Eastern cultures, you're assumed to go through these stages in a universal, fashion. Now, I want you to notice something here. Now, you've got stage, 1, 2, and 3, and there's 4 up there. Most people get to 4. Very few people get to 5, though. Very few people can make it to that sort of, I am, reasoning at a point where I feel, I'm basing my decisions off of my own morals and my own moral reasoning. This doesn't even include stage 6. Why? Well, typically, people who are at stage 6 typically are martyrs. They typically die very early because they're acting out of their own sense of morality, and that typically puts them against the society at large. So, I mean, if stage 6 was on here, you could be pretty well assured that, well, it may not even appear in this age group that we see presented on this chart. So this is an example of a situation requiring moral reasoning that is in Matthew chapter 12, and this is a fairly famous, way of looking at moral reasoning and how it applies to religion and spirituality. And it's talking about how the Pharisees lambasted the disciples for picking grain on the Sabbath. And so Jesus, who was undoubtedly at stage 6 moral reasoning, cites these various examples of the law and says that the disciples are innocent. And so what I would want you to think about then is, what stage do you feel like the Pharisees are on? Probably somewhere around the conventional stages, maybe 3, maybe 4, because they're looking at the law and saying, their reasoning is so myopic in that they can't move beyond the law that has been established. So these are just some questions to think about when working with adolescents in a therapy setting. So consider that, adolescents are going through a period where they are trying to figure out who they are. They're trying to learn how to apply their values and core systems. And really, they may have a very wide variety of stages in which they may present their moral reasoning. So it's very important for us to understand, where an adolescent exists along a moral continuum. Because, for instance, if they come into us with substance abuse problems, for instance, they may say, you know what, I'm not hurting anybody. I'm, just trying to relax, trying to have fun. And, it's only society who has the problem, So what stage of moral development would those children be at? So let's talk about challenges to Kohlberg's theory. Research found that females typically scored 1 full stage below male counterparts. And so Kohlberg was challenged by Gilligan, who said, okay, either females are just less moral than males, or something's wrong with your theory. And she came up with the idea that there are, again, 3 levels of moral development, but hers focused more around caring for people. Caring for oneself is the base level. Caring for others is a level 2, self-sacrificial actions. But level 3 is caring for self and others. So being able to care for yourself as well as assist others when they need help. So certain researchers have kind of taken a look at men and women and said, okay, what's the differences in their reasoning, their moral reasoning? And they found that men typically have a greater sense of justice and right versus care and responsibility in women. Men typically treat everyone fairly at the same time, whereas women typically care about everyone's suffering. Men are more interested in equality, whereas women tend to be more focused on well-being of other people. Men typically apply the rules in a cold, logical, or impartial way, whereas women typically bring in a sense of emotionality and connectedness to their decision-making process. And men typically have a sense of responsibility toward the abstract, whereas women typically see things more in terms of reality and individual needs. Now, again, don't, don't hate me. I'm just the messenger on this. This isn't necessarily right or wrong. This is kind of just what they found in this in this research, and it's not meant to be stereotypical in any way. But this is just the findings that they came up with. And so, applying this to Kohlberg and Gilligan, you see that Kohlberg is indeed very justice oriented and sees that the highest level is justice for all people, whereas Gilligan does typically focus on relationships, caring for self and others, and both of these theories bring in have biblical truths to them. Both of them, do kind of lean on principles that are espoused in the Bible, even though neither of these individuals were uh, professing Christians. So, if these statements that are reflected here, do unto others as you would have them do to you, and love your neighbor as yourself, both of those are true, well then perhaps both Kohlberg and Gilligan are right, and the answer is somewhere in between. And we typically find, actually, that most men and women do, in fact, use both principles. 90% of them, in fact. And of that 90%, 65% have the following preferences. Of the 65%, 93% of men typically are justice-oriented. 62% of women are typically care-oriented. But 38% of women are also justice-oriented, whereas 7% of men typically are care-oriented. 0% of men are without justice. That's very rare to see in most studies. A 0 or 100% of something is extremely rare. So that tells you something. 23% of women are justice absent. 38% of men are care absent. And 8% of women are care absent. So you can kind of see some patterns here. Well, maybe not patterns, but there's some significant statistics here, depending on the size of the sample that was used. I'm not entirely certain. I haven't taken a look at this particular study myself. But you can see that both men and women do operate from a sense of justice. And that more women, a lot more women than men, operate off of a sense of care. This isn't necessarily meant to be stereotypical, but it is intended to kind of shed light on how we reason as men versus women and how we come to moral decisions, and also help us understand the focus and the emphasis that Kohlberg placed upon justice and the emphasis that Gilligan placed upon care. So how do we apply this to working with adolescents? Well, I mean, like I said before, think about if a child comes in for, problems with drugs and alcohol, delinquency and violence, any number of problems. How do we work with them to figure out, okay, is this who you really want to be? Is this really the identity that you want to assume? Or could we work towards something better? Could we work towards something greater than where you're at right now? In terms of spiritual applications, well, how do they identify themselves as Christians? Are they in groups of Christians? Do they surround themselves with Christian individuals? Or are they basically, rejecting and repudiating all of the moral reasoning and the biblical lessons that they have been taught as children, if they have been taught any at all? And in terms of multicultural questions, well, I mean, we just talked about What are the biases that are operating within Kohlberg's and Gilligan's work? The cultures, the gender culture is highly present in both theories. So, like I said again, the truth probably lies somewhere in the middle. Also, thinking about things like the universality of Kohlberg's theory. Is his theory of moral development really uh, something that is universal, or can it be different for between cultures? How do children and adolescents change and differ in how they mature and see themselves as people in society? Independent? Well, maybe that's a Western culture concept. What about collectivistic cultures? How do they view this sense of independence in adolescence? Something to think about. So that does it for this lecture. So what I'm going to do is post this as soon as I can on YouTube. And if you have any questions, please feel free to email me, ask me anything that you need clarification on. I'll be glad to do so. And until our next Blackboard Collaborate session, I hope you all have a wonderful week and good studies.